I'm Rebecca Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. Christmas morning should have been one of the happiest days of my life, but instead it became the day my own mother cut me out of her world with 5 words that still echo in my nightmares. I had just announced I was pregnant with my first child, expecting joy, maybe some tears of happiness, certainly some excitement about becoming a grandmother. Instead, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't want you or that bastard in this family. You're dead to me and out of the will." Just like that. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I sat there for exactly 3 seconds, processing what had just happened, then calmly reached into my purse and pulled out the carefully wrapped present I'd spent weeks preparing for her. I placed it on the coffee table, stood up with all the dignity I could muster, and walked out of that house forever. What my mother didn't know was that inside that innocent-looking Christmas box was something that would change everything between us. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by family during what should have been a celebration. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this whole mess started, because trust me, this story gets wild. 3 years ago, I was living what I thought was a pretty normal life. I worked as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, had my own apartment in downtown Portland, and was dating this guy named David Martinez. Now, David wasn't exactly what you'd call traditional boyfriend material. He was a tattoo artist, rode a motorcycle, had long hair, and came from a working-class Mexican-American family. My mother, Patricia Thompson, took one look at him and decided he was the devil incarnate. You have to understand something about my family. We're what you might politely call old Portland money. My grandfather built a successful lumber business back in the 1950s, and my mother has spent her entire life acting like we're royalty because of it. She belongs to the country club, hosts charity luncheons, and has very specific ideas about who people like us should associate with. In her mind, nurses were fine for other people's daughters, but I should have married a doctor by now and started producing well-bred grandchildren. David and I met at the hospital when he came in after a motorcycle accident. Nothing serious, just some road rash that needed cleaning up, but he was so calm and funny while I worked on him that I found myself looking forward to his follow-up appointments. When he finally asked me out, I said yes, without thinking twice. He was intelligent, kind, hardworking, and treated me like I actually mattered. After dating guys who saw me as arm candy or a stepping stone to my family's money, David's genuine interest in who I was as a person felt revolutionary. The first time I brought David home for Sunday dinner was exactly the disaster you'd expect. My mother spent the entire meal asking him pointed questions about his career prospects and long-term financial planning. My father, who usually stayed out of my dating life, kept making comments about how dangerous motorcycles were and whether David had considered more stable transportation options. Meanwhile, my younger brother Michael, who was 25 and still living in my parents' basement while finding himself, sat there smirking like he was watching a comedy show. David handled it all with incredible grace. He answered every question honestly, talked about his plans to open his own shop, and even complimented my mother's cooking. But I could see the calculation happening in her eyes. This wasn't the son-in-law she'd envisioned for her investment portfolio. I mean, her family. After David left, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher. "Rebecca, honey, I'm sure he's a nice enough person, but you have to think about your future. What kind of life can a tattoo artist really provide? What would our friends think? What about children's college funds and retirement planning?" I reminded her that I had my own career and could contribute to any future financial planning, but she waved that away like it was irrelevant. "Nursing is a lovely profession, dear, but it's not a lifestyle. You need a husband who can support you properly." The criticism became a constant background noise in our family interactions. Every phone call somehow circled back to David's shortcomings. Every family gathering included subtle digs about my phase and when I was going to settle down with someone appropriate. My brother Michael, who had never held a job for longer than 6 months and whose idea of ambition was reaching the next level in whatever video game he was obsessing over, somehow felt entitled to lecture me about David's lack of direction. The breaking point came when David proposed. He didn't do it at some fancy restaurant or make some grand gesture that would photograph well for social media. Instead, he proposed on a Tuesday evening while we were cooking dinner together in my apartment. He'd been telling me about his day, something funny that happened at the shop, and then suddenly got quiet and said, "Becca, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" The ring wasn't huge or ridiculously expensive, but it was perfect. He'd designed it himself, incorporating elements that represented both of us. It was thoughtful, personal, and absolutely beautiful. I said yes immediately, not because I needed to think about it, but because I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. When I called my parents to share the news, you'd have thought I announced I was joining a cult. My mother went completely silent for about 10 seconds, then launched into a speech about how I was making a mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life. She actually used the phrase throwing away my potential as if my worth as a human being was somehow tied to the income bracket of my husband. My father was marginally more diplomatic, but not by much. He asked if we'd considered a long engagement to make sure this was really what I wanted. Even Michael got on the phone to share his wisdom about how marriage was a big step, and maybe I should date around more before settling down. This from a guy who hadn't had a girlfriend longer than 3 weeks since high school. But the real nuclear explosion came when we announced the pregnancy 6 months after the wedding. David and I had planned to wait a year or two, but sometimes life has other ideas. We were excited, maybe a little nervous about the timing, but genuinely thrilled about starting a family together. I decided to tell my parents in person, thinking maybe the reality of becoming grandparents would soften their attitude toward David. I was so naive. I actually thought this might be the moment they finally accepted him as part of the family. I mean, this was their first grandchild we were talking about. Surely that would matter more than their prejudices about his background. I should have known better. My mother's reaction to the pregnancy news was even worse than her response to the engagement. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask about due dates or baby names or whether I needed anything. Instead, she immediately started calculating how this would affect the family's reputation and whether people would think I had to get married. The fact that we'd been married for 6 months seemed irrelevant to her. In her mind, pregnancy meant scandal, especially when the father didn't meet her social standards. She actually suggested I should consider other options, which I shut down immediately. Have you ever experienced complete family rejection during what should have been a happy moment? Let me know in the comments, because I'm starting to think toxic families are more common than we admit. The months leading up to Christmas were increasingly tense. My mother made it clear that David wasn't welcome at family events, which meant I stopped attending them too. She'd call me occasionally to check in, but every conversation became an opportunity to criticize my choices and predict doom for my marriage. Meanwhile, Michael continued living in their basement, contributing absolutely nothing to society but somehow maintaining his position as the golden child who could do no wrong. The double standard was infuriating, but I'd learned to expect it. David's family, on the other hand, embraced me completely. His parents, Maria and Carlos, welcomed me into their home like I'd always belonged there. They were excited about the baby, constantly asking how I was feeling and whether we needed anything. His sister Rosa took me shopping for maternity clothes and baby supplies. They made me feel like family in a way my actual family never had. The contrast was stark and painful. Here were people who barely knew me treating me with more love and respect than I'd ever received from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. As Christmas approached, I made one last attempt to bridge the gap. I called my mother and asked if we could spend Christmas morning together as a family. I thought maybe the holiday spirit, combined with the fact that I was now obviously pregnant and glowing with happiness, might soften her heart. She agreed, but with conditions. David wasn't invited. This was to be a family-only celebration, and apparently my husband of 8 months didn't qualify as family. I almost declined, but something made me accept. Maybe I needed to see for myself just how far she was willing to take this rejection. I spent days preparing the perfect Christmas gift for her. Not just any gift, but something that would communicate everything I couldn't say out loud. Something that would make my position crystal clear, while maintaining the dignity she'd never shown me. Christmas morning arrived gray and drizzly. Typical Portland December weather. I drove to my childhood home with that carefully wrapped present on the passenger seat, my heart pounding with anticipation. This wasn't going to be a typical holiday exchange of sweaters and gift cards. This was going to be a reckoning. The house looked exactly the same as it had throughout my childhood. Perfectly decorated, perfectly landscaped, perfectly designed to impress the neighbors and maintain appearances. My mother answered the door wearing a designer Christmas sweater that probably cost more than most people's car payment. "Rebecca, dear, you look substantial," she said, eyeing my pregnant belly with something that wasn't quite approval. "Come in. Michael and your father are in the living room." The family room was decorated like something from a magazine spread. Every surface gleamed, every ornament placed with mathematical precision. My father sat in his usual chair, reading the financial section of the newspaper. Michael sprawled on the couch in his pajamas, playing games on his phone despite being 25 years old. Neither of them looked up when I entered. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. Well, I attempted pleasantries while they provided minimal responses. My mother asked perfunctory questions about my health, but showed no interest in the answers. My father grunted occasionally. Michael ignored me entirely. Finally, I decided it was time to make my announcement. I'd practiced this moment, Imagined how their faces would change when they realized they were going to be grandparents and grandfather respectively. I pictured my mother softening, maybe even tearing up a little. I imagined my father putting down his newspaper and actually looking at me for the first time in months. "I have something to tell you," I said, sitting up straighter. "David and I are expecting our first child. You're going to be grandparents." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's newspaper crinkled as his hands tightened around it. Michael finally looked up from his phone, but only to smirk. And my mother's face went through a series of expressions that I'll never forget. Surprise, calculation, disgust, and finally cold fury. "I don't want you or that bastard in this family," she said, her voice perfectly calm and controlled. "You're dead to me, and out of the will." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Not because I cared about the money, though that stung too, but because of the finality in her voice. This wasn't anger or disappointment. This was complete rejection of me and my unborn child. For a moment, the room felt frozen in time. My father continued hiding behind his newspaper, refusing to meet my eyes. Michael went back to his phone as if nothing important had happened. And my mother sat there looking satisfied, like she'd finally solved a problem that had been bothering her. But here's the thing about being rejected so completely. It clarifies everything. All those years of trying to please her, trying to fit into her vision of who I should be, trying to earn her approval, suddenly seemed pointless. She'd made her choice, and now I was free to make mine. I reached into my purse and pulled out her Christmas present. I'd wrapped it in beautiful paper, tied it with an expensive ribbon, made it look like the perfect gift from the perfect daughter. I placed it carefully on the coffee table in front of her. "This is for you," I said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Mother." Then I stood up, smoothed down my maternity dress, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, suddenly uncertain. "Rebecca, don't be dramatic. We can discuss this like adults." But I was done discussing anything with people who had already made up their minds about me. I walked out of that house knowing I would never return as their daughter, begging for acceptance. When I came back, it would be on my terms. What I didn't see, but heard about later, was what happened when she opened that box. According to Michael, who called me 3 hours later in a panic, my mother started screaming the moment she lifted the lid. She screamed so loud that the neighbors called the police thinking someone was being murdered. Inside that beautiful Christmas box was a single ultrasound photo of her grandchild, and a handwritten note that read, "This is the grandchild you'll never know. Merry Christmas from the family you rejected." The screaming continued for nearly 20 minutes. The phone call from Michael came exactly 3 hours and 14 minutes after I walked out of that house. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot trying to process what had just happened when my phone rang. His voice was shaky, almost panicked, which was unusual for someone who normally couldn't be bothered to show emotion about anything. "Rebecca, what the hell did you put in that box?" he asked without even saying hello. "Mom's been screaming for 20 minutes straight. Dad called 911 because he thought she was having a heart attack. The neighbors are all outside trying to figure out what's going on. She won't stop saying the baby, over and over again." I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. I put exactly what she deserved. Michael. A reminder of what her choices cost her. What does that even mean? She's completely losing it. Dad's trying to get her to take one of her anxiety pills, but she won't listen to anyone. She keeps staring at this ultrasound picture and crying. I've never seen her like this. Maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to cut her pregnant daughter out of the family, I replied calmly. "Did you think there wouldn't be consequences for treating people like garbage?" There was silence on the other end, then Michael's voice came back smaller, uncertain. "Look, I know things got heated in there, but maybe if you came back and talked to her when she calms down." I almost laughed. Almost. "Michael, she didn't get heated. She didn't say something in anger that she'll regret later. She looked me in the eye and told me I was dead to her. She told me my unborn child was a bastard. That's not something you take back with an apology and a family dinner." "But your family," he said weakly, and I could hear how hollow those words sounded even to him. "No, I was family. Now I'm just the daughter who finally stopped pretending that love should hurt this much." I ended the call and turned off my phone. What do you think will happen next? Will Rebecca's mother try to fix things? Or will this family split become permanent? Drop your predictions in the comments below. David found me 2 hours later, still sitting in that parking lot. He didn't ask questions, just got in the passenger seat and held my hand while I told him everything that had happened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry that my existence in your life cost you your family." That's when I started crying. Not for my mother's rejection or my father's cowardice or Michael's indifference, but because this amazing man was apologizing for something that wasn't his fault. "Don't you dare blame yourself for their bigotry." I managed through the tears. "You didn't cost me my family. They chose to throw me away rather than accept that I found someone who actually loves me. The next few weeks were a blur of pregnancy symptoms and emotional processing. I was now 15 weeks along, starting to show clearly, and dealing with morning sickness that seemed to think it could happen at any time of day. David was incredible through all of it, bringing me saltines and ginger ale, holding my hair when I was sick, and somehow managing to make me laugh even when I felt terrible. His family stepped up in ways that constantly amazed me. Maria, his mother, started calling me every few days just to check in, not to pry or criticize, but to genuinely ask how I was feeling and if I needed anything. Carlos, his father, spent a weekend building a crib in their garage, insisting it was practice for when he built one for our house. Rosa dragged me shopping for baby clothes, gleefully buying tiny outfits in every color except blue or pink because we'd decided to wait to find out the gender. The contrast with my biological family was stark and painful. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement that I existed. It was like I'd been erased from their lives as completely as they'd been erased from mine. 3 weeks after Christmas, my mother made her first attempt at contact. Not to me directly, of course, because that would require admitting she might have been wrong. Instead, she called my best friend Sarah, who I'd known since nursing school. "Your mother wants me to tell you that she's worried about you," Sarah reported during our weekly coffee date. "She says she's concerned about your health and the baby's health, and she thinks you're making decisions based on hormones rather than logic." I nearly choked on my latte. She's concerned about the baby's health? The same baby she called a bastard and said she never wanted to meet? "I'm just telling you what she said," Sarah replied carefully. She also mentioned something about family therapy. She thinks maybe if you all sat down with a professional... "Sarah, I love you, but I need you to understand something. This isn't a misunderstanding that can be fixed with therapy. She didn't accidentally hurt my feelings. She made a deliberate choice to reject me and my child based on her prejudices about my husband. There's nothing to work through except her own bigotry." "But she's your mother," Sarah said, falling back on the same argument everyone seemed to think was magical. "Being someone's mother doesn't give you the right to treat them terribly and expect forgiveness," I replied. "Being someone's mother means you're supposed to love them unconditionally, not set conditions they have to meet to earn your acceptance." My pregnancy progressed beautifully despite the family drama. At 20 weeks, David and I found out we were having a daughter. We cried together in that ultrasound room, staring at the screen showing our tiny girl sucking her thumb. David immediately started talking to my belly, telling our daughter about all the places he wanted to take her and all the things he wanted to teach her. That night, lying in bed with his hand on my growing bump, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. This little girl would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved exactly as she was. She'd never have to earn acceptance or meet impossible standards to be worthy of her parents' love. She'd have David's warmth and creativity and my determination and independence. Most importantly, she'd have both of us, united and committed to giving her everything we'd never had. The birth was intense but uncomplicated. Lily Rose Martinez Thompson arrived 3 days before her due date, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with her father's dark hair and what looked like my stubborn chin. David cried when they placed her on my chest. I cried when she wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb. Even the nurses were tearing up at how completely smitten he was with his daughter. The first few months of Lily's life were exhausting and magical in equal measure. David threw himself into fatherhood with the same passion he brought to everything else. He learned to change diapers with the precision of a surgeon, figured out how to make bottles one-handed while holding a fussy baby, and somehow managed to function on 3 hours of sleep while still working full-time to support us. I took my full maternity leave, something I'd never imagined I'd be able to afford. But David's tattoo shop had taken off beyond our wildest expectations. Turns out having an artist who actually listened to what clients wanted and created custom work instead of just copying flash sheets was revolutionary in Portland's saturated tattoo market. He'd been featured in a local magazine and had a waiting list stretching 3 months out. During those quiet middle-of-the-night feedings, I found myself thinking about my parents and Michael. Not with anger anymore, but with something closer to pity. They were missing this incredible little person who smiled at everyone she met, who had David's infectious laugh, who was already showing signs of being as stubborn as her mother. Their prejudice was costing them the chance to know their granddaughter, and that was their loss, not ours. When Lily was 4 months old, my mother made another attempt at contact. This time she called my workplace, somehow tracked down my supervisor, and tried to convince her that I was having postpartum mental health issues and needed family intervention. My supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, was not impressed. "Your mother seems to think you're unstable and making poor decisions about your child," Dr. Walsh told me when I returned to work part-time. I told her that as far as I could see, you were one of the most level-headed new mothers I'd ever worked with, And if she was genuinely concerned about your welfare, she should try talking to you directly instead of going behind your back. What did she say to that? I asked, though I could guess. She hung up on me. Dr. Walsh replied with a slight smile. For what it's worth, Rebecca, I've worked with hundreds of new mothers, and you're handling everything beautifully. That little girl is lucky to have you as her mom. I was promoted to charge nurse 6 months later, partly because I'd earned it through years of excellent work, but also because my experience juggling motherhood and nursing had somehow made me even better at managing the chaos of a busy hospital floor. The raise meant David and I could start looking at houses instead of renting our small apartment. Everything changed the day Michael showed up at our new house unannounced. Lily was 8 months old, crawling everywhere and getting into everything, when I heard the doorbell ring. David was at work, and I was on my day off, so I answered the door with Lily on my hip. Michael looked terrible. Thinner than I'd ever seen him, stubble covering his usually clean-shaven face, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. But what shocked me most was the expression on his face when he saw Lily, pure wonder, followed immediately by something that looked like grief. "Oh my God," he whispered. "She's beautiful. She looks just like you did when you were a baby." I didn't invite him in, but I didn't slam the door either. "What do you want, Michael?" "I need to tell you something," he said, not taking his eyes off Lily, who was staring at him with curious baby intensity. "About Mom and Dad, about what's been happening since you left. If this is some attempt to guilt me into reconciling—" "No," he said quickly. "It's not that. Rebecca, they're getting divorced." That stopped me cold. My parents had been married for 32 years. They'd built their entire identity around being the perfect couple with the perfect life. "What are you talking about?" "It started right after Christmas. Dad couldn't handle how Mom treated you. He kept saying she'd gone too far, that cutting off a pregnant daughter was unforgivable. They started fighting constantly. Mom insisted she was protecting the family reputation. Dad said she was destroying the family. It got ugly fast." Michael shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Then Dad found out about the money." "What money?" "The money Mom's been giving me for the past 2 years. Thousands of dollars, Rebecca. Money she told Dad was for household expenses or charity donations. Turns out she'd been funding my entire lifestyle while lecturing everyone else about responsibility and financial planning." I felt the pieces clicking into place. "How much money, Michael?" $43,000, he said quietly. "She's been paying my rent, my car payment, my credit cards, everything, while you were working double shifts to pay for nursing school, and Dad was budgeting every expense to the penny." The rest of the story came out slowly, painfully. My father had discovered my mother's secret financial support of Michael during the divorce proceedings. She'd been systematically lying to him for years about their expenses, all while maintaining her facade of disappointment in her children's life choices. The irony was devastating. She'd rejected me for marrying someone she deemed financially unsuitable while secretly bankrolling Michael's complete failure to launch. "Dad moved out 3 weeks ago," Michael continued. "He's living in a condo downtown. Mom's rattling around that big house by herself, and she's—" He paused, searching for words. "She's what?" "She's obsessed with you and Lily. She's hired a private investigator to get photos of you. She knows about your promotion, about the house, about David's business success. She has this whole scrapbook of pictures and newspaper clippings about both of you. It's honestly creepy." I looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in my arms during this conversation. This beautiful, innocent little girl was being stalked by her own grandmother because of choices I'd made to protect her from toxic people. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Michael. "Because I realized something when I saw her just now," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've been living off Mom's money for 2 years while judging you for your life choices. You left home, built a career, found someone who loves you, created this beautiful family, and I've been sitting in their basement playing video games and cashing checks. You were right to cut us off, Rebecca. We were toxic. What do you want from me, Michael? Forgiveness? Permission to feel better about yourself? I want to know if there's any way I can be part of Lily's life," he said quietly. "I want to be the uncle she deserves, not the disappointment I've been as a brother. I'm getting my own apartment next week. I found a job. I'm finally growing up, and I'd like to do it with some connection to my family that doesn't involve lies and manipulation." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown up with. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and something I'd never seen from him before: accountability. "You can start by respecting my boundaries," I said finally. "No information goes back to Mom. No updates about Lily, no photos, no stories about our lives. If you want to be part of this family, it's completely separate from them." "Understood," he said immediately. "And you prove you've changed through actions, not words. One mistake, one betrayal, One attempt to manipulate me back into that dysfunction, and you're done. Forever. I understand, he replied. Rebecca, I know I can't undo the damage, but I want to try to be better. 6 months later, Michael had kept every promise he'd made. He'd moved into his own place, gotten a steady job, and slowly begun building a genuine relationship with David and me. He was awkward with Lily at first, but she seemed to bring out something good in him. Watching him on the floor, teaching her to stack blocks, I saw glimpses of the brother I'd hoped for but never had. My parents' divorce was finalized that spring. According to Michael, my mother had to sell the family home to pay the settlement. My father reached out once through a lawyer, asking if he could establish some kind of relationship with his granddaughter. I considered it carefully, then declined. Too much damage had been done, and I wasn't willing to risk Lily's well-being for his regrets. As for my mother's obsession with tracking our lives, I handled that with a restraining order and a very clear message delivered through my attorney. The stalking stopped immediately. David and I renewed our vows on Lily's first birthday, surrounded by his family, Michael, and the friends who had supported us through everything. As we promised to continue choosing each other every day, I looked out at our small but genuine gathering and felt complete. The little girl who once screamed for 20 minutes about a grandchild she'd never know now had a family who would never question her worth. And sometimes, that's exactly the Christmas miracle you didn't know you needed. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your real family when your biological one fails you. Remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.